educate us on blueberries.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Stephanie. I appreciate the invitation very much. Very, very exciting to see this big crowd here. Um, I'm going to share my screen, and if you'll make sure that you're seeing it, just let me know. And let's see. And hopefully we're on the first slide. Does that look right?
It does look right.
Okay, thank you. Wow. Again, really appreciate the opportunity to join you here. I hope this is useful for you. I've known Stephanie for a while. I always appreciate the opportunity to see her again and talk shop with Extension. Um, the talk that Stephanie asked me to present is not so much a commercial blueberry planting talk as it is a discussion of growing blueberries on a smaller scale. So, small pick your own or backyard plantings, and try to cover some of the basics. What you'll see in the talk is a lot of pictures of big blueberry fields because that's a lot of the places that I work. But the concepts involved are the same, whether it's 10 acres of blueberries or one bush in your backyard. So we're going to go over some of the basics and lots of pictures in this presentation. So I hope that's useful for you as it is for me. Could like to see pictures of what folks are talking about. So if we start off talking about blueberries in a broad sense, they are a vaccinium species. They're related to azaleas, cranberries, lots of things in the heath family, the Ericaceae. They are a multi-trunked plant, so not a single stem like a tree, but a bush. They're deciduous, they're woody perennials, so they do require winter chilling. They're acid-loving plants, and they're native. So when we talk about blueberries, there's lots of native blueberries in our East Coast and in the U.S. If you take a look at blueberries in the different seasons of the year, in the wintertime, they are dormant bare stems, and you can see flower buds out on the ends of the twigs. And so that's where the berries are going to be. And if we look across to spring, of course, springtime, the berries bushes bloom. They're pollinated by insects. And then in the summertime, we have fruit. The flowers are pollinated. They form berries, and that's the part we all look forward to. And then the last picture there in the lower right corner is in the fall of the year. And what I'd like you to notice there is the flower buds that are forming in the leaf axils of that twig that is showing that beautiful fall color. So what you need to take away from that is that the flower buds for the next year have already formed before the leaves fall off in the previous summer and fall. So that has implications for how you prune blueberries because, of course, if you prune all those flower buds off, then you don't have any berries the following year. So just want you to be aware of that cycle and the fact that the flower buds form in one year for the next year's crop. Now, some of the other native vaccinium species, these are just pictures I've taken over the years around North Carolina. Bearberry is Vaccinium erythrocarpum, and that's pictures from Grandfather Mountain. The sparkleberry is a species that's really common in coastal North Carolina, and it fruits in November. So you'll go out around Thanksgiving and see these shiny black berries on the bush. Deerberry, and then my favorite, that's my backyard in Wilmington. That's creeping blueberry, Vaccinium crassifolium. And when I mow the grass, the mower just goes right over the top of it. But if you pick up the stem, you can see there flowers and fruit forming right out there in the lawn. So this is just a really diverse and fascinating genus of plants that are native here and very diverse in North Carolina and Virginia. Here's your trivia question, blueberry or huckleberry? I know some folks use the terms interchangeably. Blueberries are vaccinium, and they have lots of small seeds. So you see on the left there, the tiny little seeds inside a blueberry. If you look at the berry on the right, if you're out in the woods and you're eating blueberries and they have really big seeds, then you're probably eating huckleberries, and that's Galacacea. That's a different genus entirely. And so those are That's a huckleberry laying on my pocket knife that I've cut open. You can see those big bony seeds inside. They have 10 big seeds sort of shaped like the crescents in an orange. So if anyone ever asks you the difference, there you go. It's the seeds. If we think about where blueberries are grown in North Carolina, they're mostly in Bladen and the counties around Bladen in southeastern North Carolina. There's about 10,000 acres of blueberries, so it's a major fruit crop in North Carolina. And the reason those blueberries are there is the naturally occurring blueberry soils that are present in that part of the state. And so these are sand-based organic soils with more than 3% organic matter. And the water table is really close to the surface. It's within 12 to 24 inches of the surface year round. So if you go out into these fields and dig a hole, you hit water. So with post hole diggers, so it's a very unique ecosystem, and it's a place where blueberries can be grown without adding organic matter and often without irrigation, except maybe for freeze protection. So when you think about growing blueberries in your backyard, think about this and think about the conditions that you're trying to create for blueberries. If this is what they need. We do have home garden blueberry plantings throughout the state. So I've got these big blue dots on the map of North Carolina where the commercial industry is, but there are blueberries in every county, I'm convinced. I've been to a lot of the plantings. We do pruning workshops around the state every year, and lots of these counties have blueberry plantings, but they've had to amend the soil to grow blueberries, and we'll talk about that a little further on. So site selection and preparation is probably the most important decision that you will make as to where to plant them and how to prepare the site. Blueberries are long-lived plants. They may be 20, 25 years old or older. I go to plantings that are even older than that. So the decisions you make up front are going to have a big impact on your success growing blueberries. When I think about the things that blueberries need, the first thing that comes to mind is pH. They're acid-loving plants. So if you think about your home garden where you're growing tomatoes or cucumbers or any sort of vegetable crop, you're usually shooting for a pH around 6.5 or so, close to neutral, close to 7. Blueberries like a pH that's much lower, so 4 to 5, 4.5 to 5.3 for rabbit eye blueberries. So a really acid soil where other crops just are not going to be happy at that pH. Blueberries like humic matter in the soil, either naturally or from what you add. So when I think about adding organic matter, I think about pine bark, peat moss, or composted sawdust, not fresh. And I also really stress drainage with blueberries, and we'll talk about that at length because that's a really important subject, especially on some of the slow draining soils that we have east of the Appalachians. And irrigation, I think, is essential in the year of establishment. Blueberries are pretty tough once they're established, but during the first year, you have a dry period when you're trying to get the bushes started, and they'll just die on you. So you really want to be considering how you're going to water them. So as an example here on an upland site, and I'm calling this an upland soil, um, this grower is adding pine bark to the soil, and so that's one way to lower the pH and improve the drainage and organic matter content of the soil. And that, so what you're looking at in that picture is the back end of a Mill Creek row mulcher. It's just a mulch distributor. You can see a big pile on the top there. So he's just driving down the road and putting out mulch down the center of the row in that raised bed, and then he'll come back, till that in, and that'll be the substrate for planting the blueberries. So that's a very strange thing to do for most crops, but for blueberries, because they really like an acid substrate, that's what I tell folks to do. And this also brings up the question of the type of material you amend with. Pine bark, the outer part of the pine tree, is a really good material for growing blueberries in. And if you do use any other part of the tree, like the interior wood, it needs to be really well decayed. So in the picture here, you see pine bark, that dark stuff, and then the wood chips are the interior, what I call the white wood from the interior part of the tree, what we think about as being lumber, wood for building things. That interior wood really takes a long time to break down. And if it's mixed into the soil, it will tie up the nitrogen until it starts to decay or until it finishes decaying. And so wood chips on the surface are okay for a mulch. No problem with that, just to mulch around blueberry bushes. But if you're something you're going to mix into the soil, it really needs to be a well decayed or the pine bark itself rather than wood chips. If we look at a blueberry root system, this is a blueberry bush that I dug up and then I just dunked it in the ditch and washed all the soil off. And so that's what you have for a root system under a blueberry bush. It's not a tap root. It doesn't have the long roots that say a muscadine grape or some other types of plants have that will really go far away from the main plant. It's just this fibrous pad of hair roots right underneath the plant. And so that's the zone that you're trying to amend. It's just the area sort of within the drip line of the branches where the roots are just right under the plant. And typically what I do when I go out to evaluate a site for any crop is I take a set of post hole diggers and dig a hole. And soil profiles vary a lot throughout North Carolina and throughout the world. And so it's really helpful to dig down and see what you have. What you're looking at here is a picture of everybody's toes around the edge of the picture. Myself, the grower, the county extension agent, and in the center is the hole that we've dug. And what I do is I pull soil out in a and lay the soil out in a clockwise pattern. So down at the bottom of the picture at 6 o'clock, you see the first lump of soil that came out of the hole, and then successively around the hole. And then when you get around there to about 3 o'clock on the clock face, you see a pile of soil that's very different colors, light colored sand. And so you can do this and look at the soil profile down 2 or 3 feet deep and see what it looks like. So, looking at this site, what I told the grower was that this is a great site for soil for crops that need a really well-drained soil. So great for tobacco. It would be a great site for muscadine grapes. For blueberries, it's going to be seasonally too dry, and so you would really have to irrigate blueberries on this site and be ready to irrigate them during dry periods in order to grow them. On a small scale, you could help yourself out a lot on a site like this with lots of organic matter incorporated into the soil before planting, and then mulch on the surface, and that would get you through the dry periods now. So, if I dig a hole like this and I hit a clay layer that where clay is really close to the surface, and I'm talking about sticky clay, like something you could make pots out of. That's just not a blueberry site. So what I'm looking for there is I'd rather have a site that's going to be a little bit dry and have to wet it than to have a site that's too wet and have to try to dry it out. So if I hit a clay layer there close to the surface, say 4 to 6 inches from the surface, I would tell the grower, don't plant blueberries here. So that would be my advice to you in evaluating a site, is to look for something that's going to drain fairly well. If it's not a well-drained site, then plan to bed it up really high so that you're planting above grade. So basic steps to establishing a new blueberry planting. Some of this we've already covered. You want to select a well-drained site, full sun, open porous soil. You want an acid soil, so you want to do test your soil and find out what the soil pH is and adjust fertility levels for blueberry. You're going to purchase the correct species and cultivars for your soil type and location. If needed, and almost certainly you would need, add acidifying organic matter, peat moss, pine bark, aged sawdust to the soil, and then plant in raised beds or raised rows rather than planting flat. So these are my setup steps for a new planting once you selected your site and start to evaluate it. Now, for soils in North Carolina and Virginia, the native pHs are often in the blueberry range. If the site has not been limed, it may be just fine. So I would do the soil test so you know what you're starting with. Okay, we'll continue with our establishment steps. You want to plant dormant bushes in raised beds or rows, usually late winter. So February or March is when we'll typically set out blueberry plants. So once they leaf out in the spring, or you're buying plants in the summertime, it's really hard to keep them alive, unless you're really dedicated to watering them through the dry periods and through the heat. So February, March is the time to do it and let them wake up in their new spot. Number eight's the one that's hard to get folks to do, but commercial growers do this. This is why the commercial folks have a nice even stand of blueberry bushes and not a lot of transplant stress, is to prune them at planting. So when I put a blueberry bush in the ground, before I ever plant it, I cut the top off. So we reduce the height of the bush by 1/2 to 2/3 at planting, and just keep 3 or 4 upright shoots, and really prune that plant hard when you set it out. There's a great temptation when you look at this plant that you just bought at the nursery and it's got flower buds all over it. You say, "Oh boy, I'm going to have blueberries the first year," and you go ahead and plant it, and you keep those flower buds. What that bush will do is put all its energy into fruit production. And that's not what you want. You want to establish the plant first and then produce fruit in later years. Commercial growers will typically not let a bush fruit until the 3rd year in the field. And so they spend the time to grow the plant, get it established, and get a nice vegetative growth before letting it fruit. So again, at planting time, remove all the flower buds. If you can't bring yourself to prune the bush at planting, when it blooms, strip all the flowers off. I just really want to stress to you to take all the fruit off in the first year or two, just so that you grow the plant rather than producing fruit. Um, in general, you want to provide water. Irrigation, I think, is essential for the first year. And there are years when we get lucky and we have a lot of rain. This year has been one of them in coastal North Carolina, where you might get by without irrigation. But most years will have a dry period that you really have to irrigate through. I encourage you to maintain a weed and grass-free zone around each plant. If the grass grows right up to the blueberry stems, it's going to really compete with that blueberry bush. Remember, that blueberry root system is just that little fibrous mat right there in the same zone that the grass roots are in. So don't give it any grass that competes with it. I'd like to see a 3 or 4 inch layer of surface mulch, pine bark, pine needles, wood chips, or even the woven plastic mulch around the plant, so that you inhibit grass and weeds and hold moisture around that blueberry root system. Now, all that 12-point step there is sounds more complicated than it is. This is some blueberry bushes planted at one of our research farms, just in the landscape as an ornamental bush. They're covered in fruit and doing really well. And this is in the sandhills of North Carolina. You can see that this bed is raised higher than the sod around, that it's been amended with mulch, and that it's got a pine bark mulch on the surface. And those bushes are doing great. So this is the type of site prep that I'd like to see you do in a backyard situation. So that you have plenty of mulch, and raise those plants so the blueberry root system is above grade, so the drainage is really good. Here's another shot. This is in the Piedmont of North Carolina. It's rabbit eye blueberries on an amended site with a shredded wood mulch on the top. So the beds themselves were amended with pine bark, and then on the surface, the grower just used what was least expensive, the wood chip material or shredded material that the tree companies produce when they're clearing right of ways. So he got this mulch for free, and uses it as a surface mulch and lets it decay around the blueberry bushes, and they root up into it, and works really well. I like this picture just because of the time of day. You can see how high the beds are on these bushes. This is a site in coastal South Carolina, and they really have a good handle on the need for drainage in that root zone. So you see that shadow down the road. Every aisle between the rows is like a drainage ditch, and that's just really important on a lot of soils. We'll just look at some more pictures here, just to illustrate what we're talking about. This is coastal South Carolina, amended and bedded. There's no plastic on the rows. This is southern high bush blueberries, and you can see the type mulch materials that are used. But again, not planted flat. These are on raised beds. Another shot, coastal North Carolina. This is blueberries with a black plastic weed mat material. Again, they're maybe 6 or 8 inches higher than that sod, and that just makes a tremendous difference in how well they root. You just really have to have aeration in the root zone in order to get blueberries to thrive. If they stay saturated too long, they really struggle. Another shot, more rabbit eye blueberries in sight with black plastic on the surface. This is in our Piedmont region. Again, just another illustration of raised beds and just some really uniform bush growth and production there. Another shot. This is from the Netherlands. The same sort of formula for growing blueberries. This is northern high bush blueberries in a very cold climate. But again, you see they've got a weed mat fabric and a raised amended bed. Another shot, South America, no plastic, but surface mulched with aged sawdust. This is where your blueberries come from in the wintertime. We get Chilean fruit through the winter into March and April. If you really feel like you have a soil that's just not at all suited for blueberries, you can grow them in bark beds. So this was a planting several years ago in South Georgia on a red clay soil. They just knew there was no way the soil was going to drain, so they built beds on top of the ground, filled them in with wood chips and pine bark, and they're growing blueberries in the bark itself. And you can do this if you can keep it from drying out. You see they have overhead irrigation there. They will grow in pine bark beds. So another way to talk about this or think about it is looking at what are common mistakes. So if you have if you have poor site preparation and a lack of raised beds, no irrigation, if you plant before you adjust the pH without soil testing, wrong species or failure to prune, these are the common mistakes that I see. When blueberry samples come into the plant disease and insect clinic at NC State, they send pictures to me and we correspond back and forth about what might be the problem. And most often, the blueberry problems that come into our clinic for diagnosis are not disease, they're not insect, they're cultural problems. They're just things that have been done wrong in the site preparation and in growing the blueberries, and they're things that are corrected by getting the pH right or getting the drainage right, rather than a disease or an insect problem. So what you see here in this picture is interveinal chlorosis, just yellowing between the veins of blueberries. This is a really common symptom of iron deficiency because the soil pH is too high. And so the way you address that is to apply sulfur around the blueberry plants judiciously, carefully, and not too often. But once a year or so, you can apply sulfur and test the soil until your pH reaches the range you want it to be in. Lots of literature out there on that on our hort information leaflets, but this is a leaf yellowing problem that is just caused by high pH, sometimes by really poor drainage. So these are some of the common mistakes in establishment. Now, I wanted to show you this picture because it illustrates a low spot with really poor drainage and then poor growth. The yellow circle is something that I added in to emphasize where the problem is occurring, and it's just a low area in the field in a fairly slow draining soil. And what was striking to me, and the reason I took this picture, is the bushes closest to us in the picture at the ends of the row are are at the edge of a ditch, and so they have better soil drainage, and they're happy. They're bright green, they're doing well. And if you look outside that circle at the back edge of the picture, the sort of the terrace row at the back of the field, those bushes are bigger and greener and look better. And this is all just drainage. So the low area in the field where it's concave is very slow draining. We dug up some of these bushes, and the root systems were just flat as a pancake. They couldn't root down into the soil because it was planted fairly flat in a low spot. So the way you would correct something like this, a couple of things. One is don't plant in a concave area, and the other way you address this, if you do have to plant through a low spot, is to plant them on really high raised beds. This is another field, again, rabbit eye blueberries, again in North Carolina. You can see the same sort of problem here. So the bushes in the foreground are doing really well, but there's a low area in the field, and this is one of our good old Piedmont red clay soils that just doesn't drain very rapidly. And so wherever there's a low spot in the field, the bushes are struggling. So again, this is something you address with site selection, with being careful where you plant and how you plant the bushes. And this is really sort of heartbreaking to see, because this is several years down the road when the field comes into production. So they do okay until the roots invest all the soil that they can get into, and then they're stunted by the lack of drainage. And so all the money in establishing this planting has already been spent, and then the problem appears. So the way you avoid this is being careful where you plant. So again, back to that same picture, raised beds cemented with pine bark, then surface mulched with sod middles seems to be the formula for a lot of North Carolina, and will be for Virginia as well. Now, I talked a little earlier about pruning young bushes, and I want to go back to that and just show you some diagrams of how you would do that. Um, this is a picture of planting where we pruned some bushes and didn't prune others. So sometimes when you get plants from the nursery, you'll get blueberries that are really leggy. They're long, tall, maybe just a single stem rather than a multi-trunk plant. And again, I'm really mean to them. I prune them back really hard. And this is the result you see. So the tall, leggy bush there in the center of the picture was not pruned at the planting time, and so it tends to leaf out and try to produce new shoots way up at the top of those long shoots. The one in the lower left was pruned at the time of planting. We just cut it right off, and you can see it's formed that multi-trunk bush, a lot healthier, a lot better looking plant, just by going ahead and pruning. Blueberries are not grafted. They are not on any sort of rootstock. So if you cut the top completely off, they'll sprout back and they'll be the same variety that you bought. The roots is the same genetics as the top. So don't be afraid to prune blueberries. If you have older, mature blueberry bushes that are out of hand, and you decide in desperation to cut them down with a chainsaw, they will come back. They'll still be the same variety. So they're very easy to prune and to manipulate to get the growth that you want and the production that you want. So just some diagrams here. When I set out a new plant, I always rub off the flower buds or prune them off, and prune back the top. Also, if you're planting a blueberry or any woody perennial for that matter, you want to gently separate and spread out the roots so that the root mass is no longer in the shape of a pot. You want to break the root system up and spread the roots out. So if we take that bush and we prune it really hard and we let it grow for a year, from February of year 1 to February of year 2, it should double in size. So we've pruned it, we've taken all that fruit load off of it, and the plant's just going to grow vegetatively. So by February of year 2, we should have lots of new reddish colored growth with flower buds out on the ends. So we'll take that bush in February of year 2 and we'll prune it, because we prune blueberries once a year from the time they're planted. And so this is before and after pruning in February of the second year. And so you see what we're striving for is a narrow base, a upright plant, and taking out branches that are crossing over. and we're starting to get some 2-year-old wood in there. So the brown stems in this picture represent 2-year-old, red stems represent 1-year-old wood, and we'll let that go for another year. And so maybe pick a few berries there in that second year in the field, but we still want to have lots of new growth. So 12 months later, the bush has doubled in size again. We're starting to get all different ages of wood coming out of the ground. So you see gray and brown and reddish, and that's you can actually tell how old blueberry stems are looking at the bark on them. And so this is this is after 12 months, and then February of year 3, and then we'll prune that bush again. And so this is before and after pruning. And again, we're after the same goals. We're narrowing the base and pruning out any crossover stems so that we have a good bush structure that's not too wide. Blueberries are clump formers, and so if you never prune, they sprout up away from the main plant. So you'll have a stem come up a foot away, 2 feet away, 3 feet away. Over time, they eventually grow together, and then you just have one big mass of a mound of blueberry that you can't walk up to and pick. So every year we want to narrow the base of the plant and make sure it stays within the footprint that we want so that we can walk up to the plant and manage it. This is what it looks like in real life. This was a pruning demonstration that as we were working our way down the road, we just backed off and took a picture. And so you see the bush that is pruned is a nice upright shape, fairly open, and the one that is not yet pruned, we can all look at that and say, wow, I see which ones I would take off. So the branches that are growing into the next bush, the ones that are too crowded in the center, you would prune those out. And I want you to take note that these are cuts that are right down at the ground. So we're taking entire branches out rather than sort of nibbling around the edges. So you have to be pretty brave and be willing to make big cuts to shape that plant. All right, so that covers pruning on young bushes. We'll go back to older bushes and pruning a little bit later on. But I want to change gears now and talk a little bit about cultivar selection, because this is a really important aspect of what you want to plant. So one of the first things to think about is chill hour requirements. Now, chill hours are just hours below 45 degrees Fahrenheit in the wintertime. And different blueberries have different chill hour requirement. So in this chart, you can see the high bush blueberry might have a chill hour range from 800 to 1200 hours in the wintertime. Now, as an example, in coastal North Carolina, we get 1200 hours most years, but some years we don't. Like in Wilmington, there are years when we get 900 hours or 800 hours. And what we see in Wilmington, in coastal North Carolina, is there are high bush varieties we can't grow because they don't get enough cold weather in the winter. And so a lot of the high bush types that are grown in New Jersey or Michigan or in the mountains of North Carolina, we can't grow at the coast because we're just too warm. So we wind up growing rabbit eye blueberries or southern high bush blueberries that have a lower chill requirement. And the way that equates to the USDA hardiness zone, the high bush tend to run in that 3 to 7 range. You think about the mountains in North Carolina or Virginia. The rabbit eyes are in zone 7 to 8, and southern high bush, there are southern high bush varieties that require little or no chill. So they can be grown right down into Florida. So when you go to the store and look for, say you go to one of the big box stores and ask for a blueberry, or look at the tags, you really want to pay attention to the type, the species, and the cultivar, because sometimes we'll see blueberries for sale in those stores that are not suitable for growing in coastal North Carolina, where I am located. And so you can buy a blueberry that's going to get freeze damaged every winter, because those low chill southern high bush will wake up after the first cool weather in winter. They'll start blooming in January because they have a really low chill requirement, and so they'll start coming out immediately, and then we have a freeze again in February, and all the flowers get frozen off. So So really be cautious about what type you buy and think about what you're purchasing. So to use North Carolina as an example, we grow northern high bush in the North Carolina mountains above about 2,500 feet. That equates to temperatures that are routinely below 10 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's just too cold in the high mountains for other types of blueberries. Most of the state, we grow rabbit eye blueberries. So foothills, Piedmont, drier areas of the coastal plain are rabbit eye country for sure. And then the southern high bush and some selected low chill high bush are in our main production areas, and they're earlier ripening than the rabbit eyes. So where you are determines what type you can grow. So what about Virginia? I think there are fewer sand-based high organic sites like we have in our commercial industry. Most sites in Virginia, you will want to use supplemental mulching. You'll need irrigation. You're going to have colder winter temperatures and higher chilling requirement. Uh, Generally, will be later ripening than North Carolina, earlier than New Jersey. Wholesale blueberry production is probably not profitable or hasn't been. And then I apologize for that last line. It's sort of faded out on me. So I think local sales or direct marketing or pick your own is the best money. If you're doing it for as a business, I think direct marketing rather than trying to ship to a wholesale market, it would be the way to go. So if you look at the map of Virginia, these geographic regions, they correlate pretty well with North Carolina. It's going to be colder, but we have the same coastal plain, the same Piedmont areas, and the same mountain regions. And so, if I'm recommending blueberries for Virginia, I'm going to be saying rabbit eyes or some of the tougher southern high bush for the Piedmont and coastal plain, and then for the mountains, definitely will be northern high bush types. For those southern higher chill southern high bush cultivars that I think have potential for Virginia, it's a short list based on my experience. I like Legacy. That's a USDA release from New Jersey. Uh, New Hanover is a NC State release that has done quite well in cooler areas, and I think, and in the Pacific Northwest, I think would be a good one to try in much of Virginia. Gupton is also a high bush, southern high bush, and that one was developed in Mississippi, and it has turned out to be quite a good variety for us in North Carolina as well. So those are three that I would think about if I was looking to grow southern high bush cultivars. In the high mountains, some of the standard cultivars, Blue Crop, Jersey, Elliott, Duke. So there are lots of northern high bush that are suitable for mountain sites. Again, you're looking at mountains and well-drained sites in the foothills that are amended with pine bark or peat moss or decayed wood chips. So I think most sites you're going to have to do some site prep and soil amendment. And then statewide for North Carolina, these are our rabbit eye cultivars that we see most often. So most of the home plantings that I go to in North Carolina are rabbit eye blueberries. And I think there's a lot of Virginia that could grow rabbit eyes quite well. They would probably not have trouble below 2,500 feet elevation in Virginia as well. So this is the most common pick your own, most common backyard type in North Carolina. The cultivars that I like, there's a big list there, but the ones I see most often are Premier and Powder Blue and Columbus. And those are the three that I like to recommend to folks. If you have a rabbit eye blueberry that sprouts up everywhere, or you got blueberries from your neighbor because it was sprouting up and they shared the sprouts with you, there's a good chance it's Tiff Blue. Tiff Blue is an old 1950s release from Tifton, Georgia, and it's a very vigorous, very large bush, very productive, but it produces a lot of sprouts, a lot of shoots that come up away from the main plant, and it's been shared all over the South. And so folks move it around a lot, and if it's a rabbit eye blueberry and it's a prolific sprouter, then it may be tiff blue. So if we look at this chart is the blueberry harvest timing by cultivar in southeastern North Carolina. A lot of what we grow in the coastal plain of North Carolina, I would not recommend for you in Virginia. So where you see the yellow arrows are the varieties that are grown in southeastern North Carolina that I think would also translate well into Virginia. So the Duke in the mountains, and on some well-drained soils and elsewhere, New Hanover and Legacy, and then for the rabbit eyes, Premier, Columbus, and Powder Blue. And you can see in this chart where those ripen, or the time of ripening in southeastern North Carolina. So in much of Virginia, they would be 2 or 3 weeks later. And so you would be over into June, July, and into August with these varieties. But as you think about which ones to plant and how long you want to have blueberries, you can see from this picture that we can have berries from the middle of May to the middle of August in coastal North Carolina just by selecting cultivars that ripen sequentially. So I think really what is important is local testing and evaluation. This is Dr. Mike Mainland. He is a emeritus professor of horticultural science, enjoying the day in the blueberry fields. You can see some blueberry bushes in this picture that have leafed out and started to produce fruit, and others in the picture that are still asleep. They're high chill varieties that haven't woken up yet. So there's a huge variation in how blueberries behave in the field, and the only way to know for sure is to test them in your area. So I would encourage you, if you're going to plant blueberries, to talk to folks who are growing them in your area. Try to find out what varieties are doing best for you in your area. Now we'll spend a little time on culture and management. Some of the key impacts there are going to be pollination, pruning, irrigation, and fertilizer. So we'll cover these very quickly here, but these are important points. Blueberry flowers are absolutely dependent on insects to form a berry. So if you don't get an insect visiting the flower, moving pollen around, you won't get berries. Now, at our research farm in Castle Hayne, we have the blueberry tract is about 50 acres, and probably 30 of it is in production right now. And we don't bring in honeybees. We have enough native pollinators in the woods around our farm, enough feral honeybees that we get really good pollination. But so I don't think you need to have your own honeybee hive in order to get pollination. But just be aware that those pollinating insects are absolutely essential for your blueberry production. The blueberry flowers are urn-shaped. The pollen's fairly heavy, so it falls out without landing on the stigma, and so you don't get self-pollination by wind. So the insects sonicate the flowers, pollen falls on their body, and they move the pollen around for you. So very, very critical step. If you have unpollinated berries that the bees did not get to, they turn red and fall off 2 or 3 weeks after bloom. And so I get phone calls about that time of year, late April. My berries are all falling off, and that's just failure of pollination. So in this picture, you can see a lot of blueberries that have started to size up, and they're starting to get a blueberry shape to them, but there's also a number of flowers in this picture that didn't get visited by an insect. And so those berries will fall off, and the ones that are sizing up will remain. Okay, a little bit about irrigation. Two types I see are most often are overhead and drip irrigation. The overhead takes a lot of water. It can be used for freeze protection, but that's usually more than you can do with say watering from a well. So a lot of situations, I think drip irrigation is the way you would have to go if you're irrigating with well water. Typically use a drip tape down the row. This grower is using two, one down each side, and that waters the blueberry plant without watering the whole world, without watering the weeds or the grass. And that's a good way to go if you need to irrigate blueberries. Just another shot of the same sort of thing. I like this picture because you can see the wetted area around the blueberry plant where there's an emitter close to each plant, and so you're just watering the soil around the plant. And again, once blueberries are established, they're pretty tough, and uh, I really feel like a lot of blueberries need irrigation during establishment, but once they're established, not so much. We get just about an inch of rain a week if you think about the total volume of rainfall. We get 45, 50 inches of rain in a year's time, but it's not evenly distributed. So the time to think about watering blueberries once they're established is going to be that period in summer where we have 5 or 6 weeks with just not a lot of rain. And at that point, it's really nice to have some irrigation. Just to touch on fertility, these are a couple of soils in North Carolina. I like to show this picture just because they're so different. This is a Carolina Bay. That black stuff in that soil tube actually is soil. That's a high humic matter, low pH site, and that's Carolina Bay muck soil, peat soil. The other soil on the left-hand side of the picture is the good old red clay that I grew up with in Western North Carolina. Low percent humic matter, low pH, and very poor internal drainage. And so blueberries will do really well in that black soil. They really struggle in that orange red soil. And so you have to take that into account when you decide how you're going to plant them and how you're going to create raised beds or add organic matter. And this also has a big impact on fertility because these soils have very different fertility requirements for blueberry. So this is that Piedmont red clay sample. The things I look for on the soil test that are circled in red, the first thing on the right there, percent humic matter is less than 1%, 0.66% humic matter. So you can look at that and say, okay, I know I've got to add some organic matter, some pine bark, peat moss, something to this soil to try to get up to 3%. The next thing I look for on the soil test is pH. This one is great. It's 5.0. That's a little high, but not too high for blueberries. So that's adequate. And then if we look up at the circle in the upper left, this is nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium recommendations for blueberry establishment, and then the second line for blueberries that are mature. And you see for mature blueberry, it's only calling for 30 to 60 pounds of nitrogen per acre, no phosphorus, no potassium. So this particular soil is only needs nitrogen fertilizer. It doesn't need phosphorus or potassium. Now, the peat soil that I showed earlier, phosphorus is going to be limiting. And so that test would come back needing a lot of phosphorus. But you really don't know this until you have your soil tested. So really strongly encourage you to do that at least once in the life of your blueberry planting. As far as timing, you want to start at leaf out in spring. Blueberries don't take up a lot of fertilizer until they start to have leaves in spring. I'm applying blueberries fertilizer every 4 to 6 weeks if it's a granular material, and not much. About what I can hold in one hand will do 3 or 4 bushes, younger bushes. You don't want to put fertilizer too close to a blueberry bush. If you pile it right at the base of the plant, it'll just knock all the leaves off. They just can't stand a lot of salt all at once. Um, you want to end fertilizing in mid to late summer to allow time for the plants to harden off for winter. And again, back to the top, do it based on your soil test results. And that's the best information you can have for how to apply. Harvesting and handling, typically pick blueberries in a 1 gallon bucket. Anything deeper will start to crush the fruit. I tie it off on my belt to leave both hands free for picking. And you want to pick every 3 to 7 days for high bush and every 7 to 10 days for rabbit eye blueberries. Now, blueberries ripen sequentially, and so you have to pick them 3 or 4 visits, 3 or 4 times once a week to get all the ripe fruit. So you pick the ripe berries at each harvest weekly and leave the green ones to ripen. You don't want to handle fruit when it's wet. That leads to decay. Once it's harvested, cool it to extend the shelf life. Again, just handle fruit dry. The pathogens are always present. So if you go to the grocery store and you see blueberries on the shelf that look moldy, that's fruit that was picked and handled wet. And so you really want to avoid that. Okay, Stephanie, are we okay on time? I see you're about 7 minutes or so before 3 o'clock.
Yeah, we're getting close to the end of time, and we
Okay,
need to do some questions and answers too. So,
uh, okay, maybe 5 or 10 more minutes.
maybe about 5-ish minutes.
Okay, all right, we'll go through this pretty quickly. So I just wanted to share pruning, and this is there's a lot of pictures, but we'll go through them pretty quickly. Pruning is just really critical for blueberries. It's a multi-trunk plant, long-lived, and if you never prune it, they just get out of hand, they get out of reach. You don't want to be picking on a ladder. You don't want the bush to grow to the point that woody perennial weeds grow up through them. And so we're going to look at pruning quickly. One thing that I'd like you to be aware of is, again, the flower buds that are going to produce next year's crop are formed the previous year, summer and fall. So you look at the blueberry stems in the winter, and those flower buds out on the ends of the stems are the nice fat buds that are real easy to see, and leaf buds further back. And so you have to leave those in order to have a crop. So we're going to prune selectively. Hand tools, we use some electric pruners as well, and those are getting cheaper. You can find those at Home Depot and places like that that are battery powered. If we talk about winter pruning of mature bushes, what I'll typically do is start at the bottom and work my way up. So first narrow the base, take out crossovers, take out 1 to 3 of the oldest canes, and then something I'm going to call head back and thin. And so we'll just take a look at that before and after, and then we'll do one in real life. So this is reshaping an older bush with just a few large basal cuts. So the lines on that backboard are about a foot apart. So this bush is about 5 feet tall. And we're just going to make a few cuts down low in the bush, branches that are angling out, branches that are crossing over. And so there's cut number 3. So 1, 2, 3 big cuts. And again, we're not doing it up in the top of the bush. We're doing it down low. And then the 4th cut is one of the finishing cuts that I'll talk about later. And so this is the same bush before and after. And so when we're pruning blueberries, we're taking out those crossovers, as you can see in the before and after, and leaving a more upright plant, making 3 or 4 cuts per bush and going to the next bush. So it doesn't take a lot of time, but you have to be pretty fearless. The last cut, that sort of finishing cut, addresses something I'm going to call stem age and berry size. This is 2 branches from the same bush on the same day. One's a year older than the other. And so you see what happens if the branches stay too long and get too highly dissected and too highly branched, is the berry size really falls off. And so if you look at a blueberry stem, we're going to follow this stem through the season. There it is in July and August with leaves, then in January in the center, and then May, June of the next year, you produce fruit where those flower buds were, and lateral shoots below the fruit. If you leave that branch another year, the tip dies, the laterals produce flower buds, and then the fruit is on the laterals. But those laterals then produce laterals. And so if you leave that branch for a 3rd year, you get really small berries and the production falls off. And so for a given branch, we're just talking about one shoot on this bush. For that given branch, year 1, year 2, year 3, the berry size decreases over time. And so what you'd like to do is prune that out before it gets to the extreme. And this is how you do that. You'll have a cane that you don't want to cut the whole thing down. You've already made your big cuts and narrowed the base and shaped the bush. But then you're going to look up into the bush and look for something like this, where you have younger wood growing off of a cane and older wood that needs to come out. Then you'll make a selective cut higher up in the plant. And so if we look at that selective cut, you've got 1-year-old, 2-year-old, and 3-year-old branches all on the same cane. You're just cutting off that 3-year-old part. And so that's a really a key part to pruning, especially with rabbit eye blueberries. And that oldest wood will tend to be hanging out away from the main bush, sort of in your face when you're pruning, because it's been bent out there by the weight of the fruit. And so it'll tend to be further out from the center of the plant. And if you look at that in real life, this is what it looks like. The wood you're going to keep is the 1-year-old whip, the 2-year-old whip that has produced laterals, and then by year 3, it's going to really start to look like a brush pile. And at that point, you're taking that whole branch off back to a younger upright. So to summarize winter pruning, start at the ground, narrow the base, take out crossovers, some of the old canes, and then do some selective pruning in the top of the plant. And I think that's about all I've got, Stephanie. This is, I will say, at the website smallfruits.org, we have all these topics in great detail in the 2019 Blueberry School. Lots of information there. So if anything you want to review, this talk and many others are on smallfruits.org. And yep, I think that's all I've got. So I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Bill. I know we've gotten questions in while you've been speaking. And Grace, maybe you can help me with this because there's a whole bunch I know that are in there.
Yeah, we've had a couple of different versions of questions about propagation. So if you have a blueberry bush and you'd like more blueberry bushes, what's your recommendation for going about propagating? And questions range from like best way to propagate, best time to propagate, and like best method for propagation. And if there's anything special you might want to know. If they don't send up shoots, can we use the cuttings from our prunings? What would you recommend?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Rabbit eye blueberries in particular put up a lot of sprouts around the plant. And if you can cut them away from the main plant with a shovel, dig them up, very often those side shoots will have roots on them. And those can be transplanted, moved to make a new bush. Again, the variety Tiff Blue is famous for producing those side shoots. So if I do move a side shoot or sprout to create a new plant, it may have a long top on it, like a whip that's 3 or 4 feet long. Cut that off until it's no longer than your finger, so that you're just moving the root piece with a little stub sticking up. And that can either be moved to a new location in the field or potted and grown off that way. Blueberries are also propagated by cuttings. Again, they're not grafted, so you can use hardwood cuttings or softwood cuttings under an intermittent mist system and produce blueberry plants that way. And that's a really common method.
Yep, that sounds like that's definitely possible to do at home
Yeah.
without a lot of problems. We got some questions about transplanting. Like if we currently have our plants in pots and we want to put them into raised beds, or if we didn't bed up when we planted, but now that we know that we should, can we dig them up and plant them in beds? Or if they've been in pots and they're kind of old, is there any problem with putting them into beds, transplanting when they're a little bit older?
Yeah, you can transplant blueberries at almost any age until it gets so big that you don't want to try to pick it up. I've moved bushes that are 12 to 14 years old, fully grown blueberry bushes, and the way you do that is cut the bush off. And remember, it's not grafted, so we'll take a chainsaw and cut the bush off a foot above the ground, and dig it up and drag it to wherever we want it to be and replant it. So you can move pretty big plants and do that fairly easily. So any size, any age, prune them hard when you do it, though. That's the key. If you try to keep the whole top, remember when you're moving a plant, you're really pruning the roots a lot to move it. So you need to prune the top to bring it back into balance.
That's a really good way to phrase it, that you're pruning the roots when you move it, because you really are doing a lot of damage to that root system.
Yeah, but it's a near-death experience for the plant, so you really have to prune it back hard so they'll survive.
Yeah, it's trying to spend all that energy maintaining it's herbaceous structure, and it's hard. What about spacing recommendations? I know for tree fruit, which is my world, that there's a lot of, it's very cultivar and training system dependent, but do you have any general spacing recommendations for blueberries?
Yes, and I apologize for not having that in the talk, but rabbit eye blueberries, I would space rows maybe 12 feet apart, and within the row, anywhere from 4 to 6 feet between plants. I wouldn't put them any closer than that. So they're going to get really big. For southern high bush and high bush, 3 to 4 feet in the row is plenty of spacing, maybe 10 feet between rows. But think about how big the bush is going to be when it's mature and what you're going to try to drive down the row. And you want to be able to mow between the rows or move the tractor through the rows if you have to.
Okay, what about pollination? So we taught our attendees last time about pollinizer species and needing to have different cultivars, especially for tree fruit. What's the recommendation for having multiple species for blueberries?
For blueberries, if you have one bush, you'll still get blueberries, but you'll get bigger blueberries and more seedy blueberries if you have two different cultivars that can cross-pollinate. So cross-pollinating is a benefit with blues, but one bush will still produce fruit. But they're all partially self-infertile. So plant 2 varieties, 3 varieties, and you'll have better fruit and more of it.
Yeah, I like to plant two because I always kill one anyway
Right.
when I plant stuff. So I always plant 2 or 3 of anything perennial. We got some questions about pruning like mature stuff, like if they haven't pruned in a really long time, and that's the slides that you put up about that kind of rehab pruning was really good. Is there a good time of year to do that?
Best time to prune is when they're fully dormant and the leaves are off, so you can tell what you're doing. So, that's usually February, March, January, February, March in there. They can be pruned really hard. You can prune blueberries all the way down to the ground if you're trying to just rejuvenate the planting. They won't produce any fruit that first year, but 18 months later they'll have some fruit. So not a lot, but over time they'll get back into production. So you can do a really fierce rejuvenation of blueberries with a chainsaw, and they'll come back and you can start pruning them normally again.
Awesome. Okay, last question is how long, like what's the lifespan of a blueberry plant? So if you're going to plant for like a home gardener, if you were going to plant or recommend planting to somebody and they want to put in like 4 or 5 plants for themselves, how long and how many years until you have your peak crop, and then how many years can you expect that plant to be productive?
Yeah, they're quite long-lived. So you would start picking some fruit in year 3, assuming you pruned the fruit off, like we say, and then they would reach peak production in year 7 or 8. And 20, 25 years is not unusual. Excuse me, for blueberry plants. So no, they're quite long-lived.
Okay. Okay, that is all the questions that we have in the chat. I've got a lot of really wonderful comments about how informative this is. I think because all of our questions were very on brand, that everybody learned a lot and is asking good questions. So thank you so much for all of your effort in preparing and presenting for us. We are very happy to have you. With that, we're going to end the recording and end the webinar. Everybody say thank you to Bill.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Bill. That was awesome.